Welcome to Mysteries in Crime, where the truth lies in the shadows. Tonight, we unravel the story of Peter Dupas, a case that would expose decades of violence hidden beneath the surface of suburban Melbourne. Tonight's clue. Question: which victim's case finally led to Peter Dupas's life sentence? Let us know in the comments below. Over 4 decades, several women were brutally murdered in Victoria, Australia, each victim suffering horrifying injuries. Their cases remained unsolved until investigators began connecting the dots. Peter Dupas, a man with a long criminal record, would become the center of a series of shocking revelations that still haunt Australia today. On the morning of Monday, April 19th, 1999, Nicole Patterson failed to show up for her psychology appointments. She was a newly registered clinical psychologist in Northcote, a quiet suburb in Melbourne. Her colleagues grew concerned. They contacted authorities, who arrived at her office shortly after noon. Inside, police discovered Nicole's lifeless body. She had been stabbed repeatedly. The scene was disturbing. Her clothing had been removed, and the violence inflicted upon her was extreme. The crime sent immediate shockwaves through the local medical community. Nicole had only recently opened her practice, and investigators found that her final scheduled appointment had been with a man named Malcolm. The scene bore similarities to other unsolved crimes. Law enforcement noted the ritualistic nature of the attack, the victim's positioning, and the focus on post-mortem mutilation. The public was initially told little, but inside police headquarters, detectives began to quietly revisit older case files. Unbeknownst to the public, this was not an isolated incident. It was just the beginning. Each of Peter Dupas's alleged victims led everyday lives until their paths crossed with a predator. Nicole Patterson, age 28, had just begun her professional career in mental health. A compassionate listener with a strong sense of purpose. She had opened her private practice only weeks before her death. Her dedication to helping others made her loss especially tragic. Friends described her as grounded, intelligent, and deeply empathetic. Mersina Halvagis was 25 years old. She was visiting her grandmother's grave at Faulkner Cemetery in 1997 when she was killed. She was known for her kind heart and strong connection to her family. The attack on her took place in broad daylight, in a public space meant for mourning and remembrance. Margaret Maher was a 40-year-old woman working in the sex industry. Her body was discovered near the outskirts of Melbourne in 1997. Though her case initially received limited public attention, it would later play a crucial role in identifying her killer. Each of these women came from different walks of life, but they were all targeted in violent personal attacks. The brutality inflicted upon them shocked investigators and hinted at a deep pattern of control, rage, and ritualistic behavior. Their families were left with questions, grief, and for many years, no answers. Peter Norris Dupas was born on July 6, 1953, in Sydney, Australia. He moved to Melbourne as a child. His criminal record began early and grew darker over time. At just 15 years old, Dupas was convicted of a stabbing. By his early 20s, he had already served prison time for a series of violent sexual assaults. Despite warnings from psychologists and parole boards, he was released multiple times, described in reports as soft-spoken and seemingly mild-mannered. Dupas masked his violent urges behind a calm demeanor.
He was known to use false names, disguises, and deceptive behavior to gain access to women.
Law enforcement viewed him as a manipulator, someone capable of blending into everyday life while harboring extreme fantasies of domination and mutilation. His preferred method of attack often involved knives, and his crimes carried distinct, gruesome signatures. Despite multiple arrests and incarcerations, Dupas had largely avoided long-term scrutiny until the late 1990s. Authorities later expressed frustration over early missed warnings, and over a system that had repeatedly allowed a high-risk offender back into society. At the time of Nicole Patterson's death, Dupas was out on parole. Again. His name would soon surface during background checks, and investigators would begin to unearth a disturbing trail that stretched back decades. The murders connected to Peter Dupas were marked by chilling precision and deeply personal violence. In the case of Nicole Patterson, her consulting room showed no signs of forced entry. She had willingly let the man in, believing he was a new client named Malcolm. Once inside, he struck quickly. Nicole was stabbed 27 times, according to official reports. The attack was frenzied, yet deliberate. After the fatal blows, her body was posed and mutilated. Her breasts had been removed. Post-mortem, a disturbing detail that would soon tie her case to others. 2 years earlier, in November of 1997, Mersina Halvagis had visited her grandmother's grave at Faulkner Cemetery. She was alone, and the attack happened without warning. She too was stabbed repeatedly. Her body was found partially concealed between headstones. The location, the level of violence, and the post-mortem mutilation mirrored aspects of Nicole's case. Then came Margaret Maher, whose body had been found months earlier in April of the same year. She had last been seen near a Melbourne street known for sex work. Her body was later discovered in a shallow grave near a cemetery. She had been strangled and mutilated, her breasts removed in a manner disturbingly similar to the other victims. Police began to suspect these attacks were not isolated, but instead the work of a single individual with a ritualistic obsession. The specific mutilations, including removal of body parts, indicated a signature behavior. These weren't crimes of impulse. They were calculated, carried out with a focus on control and degradation. In each case, the victims had been ambushed in locations where they were vulnerable. Nicole in her quiet office, Mersina in a cemetery, Margaret on a roadside. There were no signs of robbery, no personal items taken. The motive was purely physical and psychological. Law enforcement specialists reviewing the crimes noted the degree of escalation. Early cases showed stabbings with limited post-mortem actions, while later crimes involved more prolonged violence and extensive mutilation. Further investigation unearthed unsolved attacks going back to the 70s, including attempted murders and violent assaults against women who survived. These early cases had similar hallmarks: knife attacks, targeting the chest, and leaving the victims posed or exposed. In interviews and psychological reports, Dupas allegedly described fantasies of dominance and control. Though never directly confessing to all the crimes, his statements and behaviors painted a clear pattern. By the time Nicole's murder was linked to Dupas, investigators knew they were dealing with a serial predator, one who had slipped through the cracks time and time again. The chilling realization was this: if Nicole had not died, would the others have ever been linked? Following the murder of Nicole Patterson, investigators turned their attention to the appointment ledger in her office. The final entry, a session booked under the name Malcolm, Detectives traced that alias back to Peter Dupas, a known offender recently released on parole. His prior convictions for knife-related sexual assaults immediately raised red flags. Police swiftly executed a search warrant at Dupas' residence, locating clothing with blood traces and handwritten notes describing violent fantasies. Detectives compared the Patterson case with other open homicides and soon began re-examining old crime scenes. They also created a timeline of Dupas' known locations, cross-referencing them with cold cases. Investigators quietly began building their case, consulting behavioral profilers and utilizing a task force to manage the growing scope. Every detail mattered. Every pattern was analyzed. The methodical approach paid off when evidence from an older crime finally provided the breakthrough they needed. Despite the brutality of the crimes, forensic evidence was limited. In the 90s, DNA testing was still evolving in Australia. Many older cases lacked preserved biological evidence. In Nicole Patterson's case, no semen was recovered, and much of the scene had been contaminated before advanced forensic techniques could be applied. However, in Margaret Maher's case, fibers found on her clothing matched items from Dupas' home. Further witness sightings of a suspicious man near the cemetery helped narrow down timelines. In Mersina Halvagis' case, forensic soil samples and Dupas' proximity to the cemetery placed him near the scene. Although definitive evidence took years to surface, the absence of clear DNA links delayed charges. But circumstantial and behavioral evidence began to build a damning case. Modern forensic reanalysis of clothing fibers, tool mark impressions, and trace elements would eventually contribute to convictions. But in the early stages, it was a puzzle without corners. The murders sparked widespread fear across Melbourne, particularly among women. After Nicole Patterson's death, counseling offices installed new security measures. Some began recording all visitor IDs. Others hired additional staff. At cemeteries, families grew cautious. Mourners no longer visited graves alone, and local police increased patrols at known high-risk locations. The city began to sense a predator was among them, and whispers of a serial killer spread quickly. Though the full scope was not yet public, the community felt the chill of an unseen danger. People asked, how had this gone on for so long? The press latched onto the story with urgency, but information was tightly controlled at first. Reporters speculated on connections between the murders, hinting at a serial pattern before police officially confirmed any link. Once Peter Dupas' name surfaced, his lengthy criminal history made headlines. Articles questioned how someone with such a record could be released repeatedly. Television programs ran retrospectives on cold cases, highlighting failures in the parole system. The media narrative shifted from individual crimes to systemic oversight. It was not just about what had happened, but about what had been allowed to happen. While Peter Dupas eventually became the prime suspect, early theories in each case varied widely. In Margaret Maher's murder, police initially believed she may have been targeted by a client. No clear suspect emerged, and the case went cold. In the murder of Mersina Halvagis, investigators considered the possibility of a stranger attack or robbery gone wrong, but the brutality of the scene raised questions. Forensic psychologists later suggested the killer displayed compulsive behavior, indicating prior offenses. Several crimes bore similar elements: knife use, breast mutilation, and body positioning, which led some to theorize a lone serial offender was responsible. Over time, Dupas criminal history and geographic movements aligned closely with multiple unsolved cases. While he was never charged in all of them, law enforcement publicly linked him to at least 6 unsolved homicides. To this day, some believe the full extent of his crimes has never been revealed. Peter Dupas stood trial multiple times between the early 2000s and the late 2000s. In 2000, he was convicted of the murder of Nicole Patterson and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. In 2004, new evidence, including witness testimony and forensic matches, led to his conviction for the murder of Margaret Maher. In 2007, Dupas was found guilty of murdering Mersina Halvagis. This trial included emotional testimony from her family and detailed forensic reconstruction of the crime scene. Each conviction was appealed, and each time, the courts upheld the verdict. Dupas maintained his innocence in all cases, but the evidence, both physical and circumstantial, painted a clear picture. He remains incarcerated in a maximum security facility, serving multiple life sentences. For many, the trials provided long-awaited justice, but not closure. Despite Peter Dupas's multiple convictions, unanswered questions remain. Several unsolved murders from the 70s through the 90s bear his signature, but no charges were ever filed. In some cases, evidence had degraded or was never collected. Survivors of earlier attacks described similar methods: sudden ambushes, knives, and post-assault degradation. Did the system miss its chance to stop him earlier? And are there victims who still have no name? Investigators believe so, but without hard evidence, their stories remain silent. For now. The case of Peter Dupas forced change. Victoria's parole policies came under intense review. Lawmakers introduced stricter sentencing for repeat violent offenders and greater oversight of parole decisions. Victim support services expanded. Training for law enforcement in handling sexual violence cases improved. Dupas became a name synonymous with systemic failure, but also with reform. Though the lives lost cannot be restored, their stories changed the future. What are your thoughts on the Peter Dupas murders? Let us know in the comments below. And remember to like, subscribe, and share this story. And as always, stay curious, stay vigilant, and stay safe.